In this video, I want to talk to you about American buttercream, how to make it right, and the things that could go wrong along the way, which would cause it to become grainy or separate. Wait, separate? Separated. Well, anyway, so I am frequently getting people sending me pictures of buttercream icing that looks like this. And they say, why is my icing so grainy or separated and what did I do wrong? And it's a little challenging to figure out what went wrong when I don't know your exact process of how you made your buttercream icing. Now, what is American buttercream icing? It is a combination, mine is 5 ingredients, a combination of butter, shortening, powdered sugar, flavoring, and liquid. And by the way, this is a page from my buttercream icing and fillings recipe ebook, and that will be linked in the description. Now, there are a few things that are very important to get right when you're making your American buttercream icing. Number one is the temperature of the butter. What I like to do is let it sit out for about an hour before I use it, so it still has a chill to it, but if I press my finger or try to squeeze it, I can get a good indent in there. If it's too cold, I really have to squeeze it too hard. That's not a good temperature. And if it's too soft, if I push it and my finger goes right through it, that's way too soft. So you need something that is slightly thawed, but still has a little bit of a chill to it. The second thing is your choice of shortening. Now, some people don't like to use shortening in their buttercream, and I totally understand that. However, I personally like to use it because the shortening melts at a higher temperature than butter. So when you're in the hot and humid months, your icing can withstand the heat a lot longer than an all butter icing. I personally prefer to use SweetTex Golden Flex High Ratio Shortening. Once you try this, you are never going to want to go back. It has such a smooth mouthfeel and it is really thick and creamy, unlike the other shortenings like Crisco, which tends to be a little bit greasy. But I do have a video where I do a shortening comparison and that will be linked below. But the quality of your shortening, like I said, the high ratio shortening is going to make a big difference in your icing. And there are a lot of people who are pretty frustrated because the SweetTex high ratio shortening only comes in big, huge 50-pound blocks. And I talked to the manufacturer and they said they don't have the equipment to make it in smaller quantities, so they don't do that. So what I did, I partnered up with Oasis Cake Supply, which is a local cake supply store about 5 minutes from me, and I told them people want the high ratio shortening, the SweetTex Golden Flex, in smaller quantities. So they now offer on their website the SweetTex high ratio shortening in 2.5 pound, 5 pound, 25 pound, and 50-pound options. And since I'm now affiliated with Oasis Cake Supply, I do have an affiliate link and I'll put that in the description. And if you click on that link, you can get 10% off of your order. So I highly recommend that you try out the SweetTex high ratio shortening in a smaller quantity just to see how it turns out. I'm telling you, you're going to love it and you're never going to want to go back to the other shortening. The third ingredient in your American buttercream is your powdered sugar. Now, it is very important to have high quality powdered sugar. Some of the off brands tend to be a little bit lumpy and will make your icing taste a little bit grainy. Now you can try to sift the powdered sugar to remove some of the lumps, but if you do have a bad brand of the powdered sugar, it's just going to be grainy. The brands that I prefer to use are the ones that I get at Aldi, and I'll put the pictures over here because I don't know what the brand names are. So Aldi has good powdered sugar, Target has good powdered sugar, and also I use the powdered sugar from a local grocery store. It's just their house brand. And you can kind of feel it in the bag. If it feels really soft when you're squeezing it in the bag, that is a good one to use. There are times that I picked it up, especially in the summertime when it's more hot and humid and the sugar starts to form clumps. If you can feel that it isn't really soft or it has little clumps in it, you're not going to want to use that brand. The flavoring doesn't really make that much of a difference in your icing consistency, but it does in the flavor. And then lastly, we use the liquid. We add the liquid. If you add too much liquid, your icing is going to separate. So what I want to do is show you quickly how I make my American buttercream, how I get it to the correct consistency, and then I did a couple little experiments. I used butter that was a little too soft. I used Crisco shortening instead of SweetTex. I used a butter that was a little too hard, and I also added a little too much liquid so I could see what the results were from doing all of these different things to the icing. So here's my little experiment.
All right, to make my American buttercream, you're going to need 2.5 sticks of butter. I prefer to use salted butter, and this has a slight chill to it, but it's been sitting out long enough that I can really press into it and make a dent with my fingers. You don't want it to be too soft and not too hard, just with a slight chill. And I'm going to use a 1/2 cup of Sweetex high ratio shortening. You can use a 3/4 cup as well. I tend to use 3/4 cup in the warm months when it's hotter and I need to stabilize my icing, but use a 1/2 cup in the winter. So it's up to you between 1/2 and 3/4 cup of the shortening. 2-pound bag of this confectioner sugar, and you do want to sift it if it's going to be lumpy. This one is pretty soft, so I'm just going to add the whole thing to the bowl without sifting it. And then I use between 2 and 10 tablespoons of liquid. I like to use water. You can use milk or cream if you prefer, but it all depends on the humidity in the air, how much liquid I use. And then I like to use Wilton clear vanilla. You can use any kind of vanilla that you choose. Now I'm going to start by putting the butter and the shortening in the bowl, and I'm going to mix this for about a minute on like a medium speed. And then since I don't have a scraper blade, I like to manually just scrape down the sides and the bottom of the bowl, and then I'm going to turn that back on a medium speed for about another minute and really mix it. Then I just turn the speed down slightly so I can add some of the flavoring. I did 2 teaspoons of the flavoring. And now that looks really good. I have a wet towel on top so my sugar doesn't go everywhere. And I'm adding 4 tablespoons of the liquid to the bowl. And then I'm just going to pour this whole thing of sugar in here. Again, you need to sift it if your sugar has lumps. That sugar doesn't, so I could just add it to the bowl. And then I'm turning that on a low speed and just mixing it until it's incorporated. And it's still going to look a little thick. So now I just want to add more water, 1 tablespoon at a time, and just see how the consistency is. Don't add too much liquid. Like, you want to add a little bit, stir it, and then add a little bit more if it's still looking a little thick. And I'm just going to turn that back up to a medium speed for about 30 seconds to stir it. And now I need to scrape the sides and the bottom, so I am just manually doing this again. You don't need to do this if you have a scraper blade. I just don't like scraper blades. And then I'm going to just mix that again on a medium speed for about another 30 seconds. This video is sped up, so it wasn't really spinning that fast. But now here is the icing. So you could see I could run my spatula through it. It's a peanut butter consistency, and there's no grains. So now let's try it with really soft butter. So this butter is way too soft. I would never use butter this soft. And then I added some of the Sweetex shortening, and I'm combining the shortening and the butter, adding the flavoring and the liquid like I did before. And I'm just doing this fast because you saw the process earlier. And I'm mixing it on low, and then when it comes together, I'm going to slowly add more liquid to get it to the correct consistency. And then, like I always have to do, scrape down the sides and the bottom of the bowl, and then I'm going to put that back on, just doing the same steps that I did previously. So the icing with the really soft butter and the Sweetex high ratio shortening was not grainy. It still looked pretty good. So now I just want to get all of my icing to be really smooth. So what I like to do, I already have other batches made. I'm just filling that bowl, and I'm going to turn that on high and mix this for about 2 minutes until all the air bubbles are beat out of the icing and it's really smooth. I do have a video showing you how I do that, but look, before I did that, you could see all the air bubbles, and then afterwards, all of that icing, there's no air bubbles and it's nice and perfect. So I'm just going to store that in my container. Now I'm going to try Crisco shortening with some really soft butter and see if the shortening is the issue, because the butter wasn't. So I'm doing the same thing, adding the butter and the sugar, and then I'm going to add the liquid. And I didn't add as much liquid because the butter was really soft, but adding the powdered sugar, covering it, then once it comes together, adding a little bit more liquid, a little bit at a time, scraping the bottom and the sides of the bowl. And then I'm just going to mix this again for about 30 seconds. And I just added a little bit more liquid to get it to the right consistency. And that actually doesn't look horrible. So now I'm going to start adding a bunch more liquid and see what happens when I do that, because a lot of people end up having icing that looks like this. Do you see how it's separating? And it just doesn't look good. So when you add way too much icing, the ingredients are going to separate and it's going to be way too runny. And even after I put it back in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes, it's still runny and it looks really separated. So don't add a lot of liquid to your icing. Do it a little bit at a time. Now let's try it with some really hard butter. So I'm having the recipe because I'm wasting all this icing. So I had really hard butter and a little bit of Crisco shortening. And I'm stopping it here because that really cold butter is not incorporating with that shortening. So if I zoom in, you may be able to see that it is kind of lumpy. So I'm going to continue with the recipe. I'm adding a little bit of water and half a bag of sugar just because I'm having the recipe because I didn't want to waste too much. And scraping the sides and the bottom again. And it still was a little chunky. So when I put it back on there, I just add a little bit more liquid and mixed it on like a medium speed. And it looks pretty good. It's not horrible, but at least it's not grainy. The worst part of this is that there's a lot of air bubbles in here, but that can always be fixed.
So there you go, there's my little experiment, and I know that some of my icing did have air bubbles in it. This was just for demonstration purposes, but I do have videos showing you how to make a lot of icing with no air bubbles. Whoa, what was that? And also how to remove air bubbles from a smaller batch of icing. So both of those videos will be linked in the description. So what did I learn from this experiment? The first thing is using really soft butter mixed with the Sweetex high ratio shortening did not yield me a grainy buttercream. It was a little softer, so I didn't have to add as much liquid, but it still turned out fine. Number two, using the soft butter with the Crisco shortening rather than the Sweetex shortening, it still wasn't grainy. However, it wasn't as smooth. However, when I started adding too much liquid to the buttercream, that's when it started to separate and it got that really weird texture. And I feel like that's what I see so often when people post pictures, what happened to my buttercream. I feel like most of the time people are adding way too much liquid. And I always say, I don't add the same amount of liquid all year round. It all depends on the heat and the humidity in the area. In the winter, when it's cold and dry, I need more liquid in my icing to get it to the right consistency. In the summer, when it is hot and humid, I need less liquid. So in the winter, I add about 4 to 5 tablespoons before I add the sugar, and in the summer, I only add about 2 or 3. So you must be aware that if it is hot and humid near you, you're going to need less liquid in your icing. So the key is to add a little bit at a time, maybe a teaspoon to a tablespoon at a time, mix it until you get it to the right consistency. And then the third thing that I did was using really cold butter with the cheaper Crisco shortening. And you saw when I was mixing it that it was lumpy because the butter wasn't mixing completely with the shortening. But as I added the sugar and started mixing it, it did incorporate and it didn't end up grainy. However, like I said before, the texture isn't as smooth and creamy as if I use the Sweetex high ratio shortening. So let's go over this one more time. There are 4 main causes of grainy buttercream. Number 1 is the improper use of your sugar. If you don't sift the powdered sugar, it could end up lumpy, which could make your icing taste a little grainy. Also, if you end up using granulated sugar rather than powdered sugar, you will get a grainy texture. The second reason why your icing may be grainy is by using low quality powdered sugar. If it's not finely milled, the crystals are going to be bigger and it's not going to dissolve in the icing. The third reason is if your butter is too cold or too warm. Like I said, you want it to have a slight chill but be able to squeeze it and put your fingerprint in the butter. And do that with the wrapper on. Don't stick your finger in the butter. And the fourth reason that your icing may be a little bit grainy is if you overmix it, you can add way too many air bubbles in there, which could make your buttercream taste a little on the grainier side. And then the 4 reasons why your buttercream is starting to separate, number 1 is because your butter is a little too soft or too cold and it's not mixing well with the shortening before you add the sugar. The second reason being what I mentioned before is you are adding way too much liquid to your icing, which is causing the ingredients to separate. The third reason your icing could be separating is if you are not mixing it long enough so the ingredients cannot come together. And the fourth reason being if you're using old butter or poor ingredients. Now, I've had it where I melted butter in the microwave way too long and I put it back in the refrigerator. I can't use that for icing anymore. I got to use that for my toast because once the butter melts and then rehardens and then if you let it thaw again, it could just have issues in your icing. So always just try to use good quality butter that isn't expired or hasn't been melted too many times. So there you go. I hope this helped you out. And again, I do have my affiliate link for 10% off of the Sweetex Golden Flex High Ratio Shortening, which you can get in 2.5 pound, 5 pound, 25 pound, or 50 pound quantities. So all of that information is down in the description. And let me know if you have any questions or comments below. And just a reminder, I do have ebooks with all of my favorite recipes. I have my signature scratch pound cake recipes, my best doctored cake mix recipes, my buttercream icing and filling recipes, along with my favorite numbers, and my favorite fonts, so they will all be linked in the description. And I do have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. All of that information is below. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake, have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.